The sentence cut through the room while my mouth was still forming the word risk. I had been mid-explanation, fingers resting on the edge of the table, eyes moving from face to face as I walked them through allocation thresholds, the part nobody rushed, the part that decided whether a $1.9 billion agreement lived or died. Then the door opened hard enough to shift the air. Vivian didn't hurry. She never did. Her heels stopped beside the table, not behind me, not politely out of the way, but squarely in the line of sight of 13 global partners who had flown in to finish this. Chicago winter pressed against the glass behind them. Gray sky. Frozen river. Wind tapping the windows like it wanted in. Thank you, Callista. We'll take it from here. A pause, long enough to make sure every ear was tuned. You're no longer needed. Security will escort you out. No one moved. Pens hovered above paper. A laptop screen dimmed. Someone at the far end exhaled through their nose and didn't bother hiding it. This wasn't confusion. This was calculation. My name is Callista. I am 42 years old. The thought landed steady, almost clinical. The way it does when adrenaline sharpens everything instead of scattering it. I'd spent years in rooms like this. Years learning when to speak and when silence did more damage than words ever could. I looked down at the documents spread in front of me, then at the faces around the table. Not one of them met Vivian's eyes. Not one of them reached for a pen. She waited for me to react. I could feel it, the slight tilt of her head, the confidence of someone already picturing the headline, the bonus, the story she planned to tell about stepping in at the last moment to save the deal. I didn't give her that moment. I gathered my notes, slow enough to make the pause uncomfortable, deliberate enough to remind the room who had been guiding them until 10 seconds ago. My old fountain pen slid into my palm, familiar weight, a habit I'd never broken. At the far side of the table, the oldest CEO there watched me with something close to recognition. I gave him a small nod and stepped back from the chair I'd been sitting in all morning. If you've ever felt power shift without a sound, you know exactly how that room felt then. I walked toward the door without looking at Vivian again. Aware of how quickly ambition had mistaken certainty for control, and wondering why she would choose this exact moment to erase the one person holding the room together. A small note before I go on this story is a work created by the writing team at RevengeAITA. The door closed behind me. Inside, no signatures moved. No one rushed to fill the silence I left behind. That was the first thing I noticed. Not confusion, not outrage, just stillness. Measured and deliberate, like everyone in the room had agreed without saying a word to pause and reassess the math. Pens hovered above signature lines. 2 laptops closed halfway, screens dimmed but not shut. The universal signal for not yet. Along the wall, a pair of legal advisors leaned toward each other. Voices too low to catch. Eyes flicking between Vivian and the empty chair I had just stepped away from. Vivian cleared her throat. Let's continue. The confidence was still there, but it had thinned. She moved closer to the head of the table. Hands braced against the leather back of my chair as if proximity alone could transfer authority. A voice from the left, calm and unhurried. Before we do, who's confirming the risk assurances discussed moments ago? Vivian's fingers tightened. The company stands by. That wasn't the question. Another chair shifted. Someone capped a pen and set it down, square in the center of their folder. Not closed, not signed. I slid my papers into my bag, slow enough to be noticed. The fountain pen went in last. Habit. Control. At the far end, the oldest CEO, their silver hair. Eyes sharp from decades of watching deals rise and rot caught my glance. The corner of his mouth lifted. Just barely. Not sympathy. Recognition. I stepped back, giving the room space to feel the gap I'd left. In places like this, how a company treats the person holding the threads matters more than any slide deck. Everyone knew it. Vivian knew it too. She just hadn't expected it to matter right now. Was this what losing looked like? Or was this the moment everyone realized the equation had changed? Vivian tried again. Voice firmer. We've covered the framework. There's no reason to delay. No one reached for a pen. I walked toward the door without being escorted. The sound of my shoes, the only thing moving. Behind me, someone asked for a brief pause. Another voice agreed. The door closed softly, but the pressure didn't lift. It followed me into the hallway. Thick and unresolved. The kind that doesn't fade, it waits. I didn't need to hear Vivian explain herself to understand what she thought she was doing. The hallway outside the conference room had gone quiet, but my phone hadn't. A message buzzed in from Martin, one of our internal finance directors. Short and clipped. She's positioning this as a leadership takeover, board visibility, bonus cycle tied to close. No sympathy, just confirmation. So that was it. Vivian hadn't cut me loose out of anger. She'd done it because she believed the hardest part was already behind us. The structure built, the resistance softened, the numbers lined up. In her mind, all that remained was the signature and the spotlight. Inside that room, she saw me as the person who walked through slides, the voice that explained things clearly, the face the partners had grown used to seeing at the table. Replaceable. What she never stopped to question was why those 13 executives' competitors in every other context had agreed to sit in the same room without tearing the deal apart. They didn't trust the company. They didn't trust each other. They trusted continuity. They trusted the person who had kept promises consistent when pressure mounted, who remembered concessions made 6 months ago and enforced them quietly, who never shifted language to suit a headline. That wasn't something you transferred by taking a chair. My phone buzzed again, this time a single line from an unfamiliar number. Is Vivian authorized to restate the assurances you made earlier? No greeting, no signature. Just a test. I slowed my steps and let the question sit unanswered. If I was just a presenter, why were they already checking whether the table still held behind me? The conference room door opened. Vivian's voice carried into the hall. Tight now? Layered with insistence. We're aligned. There's no need to reopen. A deeper voice cut in. Calm and unimpressed. Alignment isn't the issue. I turned before the door closed again, catching a glimpse of bodies leaning back instead of forward. Hands moving away from paper. The deal wasn't collapsing yet, it was hesitating. And hesitation, at this level, was never accidental. The chair scraped softly as Vivian pulled it out and sat where I had been moments earlier. She didn't look around for permission. She didn't need to. Her hand moved straight to the folder in front of her, flipping to the last page with practiced confidence. The pen was already uncapped when a voice from across the table broke the motion. Before that, the interruption wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. It came from the German CEO, posture relaxed, hands folded as if this were routine housekeeping rather than a pivot point. Vivian froze just long enough to be noticed. Who is legally confirming the verbal commitments Callista made 10 minutes ago? The pen hovered, not shaking, just suspended. Vivian leaned back slightly. Buying time. Those commitments were made on behalf of the company. That still doesn't answer the question. A second voice joined in, quieter, from the right. Some of those assurances were conditional. Another pause. Papers stopped moving. Along the wall, one of the legal advisors set his pen down flat and slid his notebook closed halfway. Across from him, his counterpart mirrored the motion without looking up. Vivian straightened. I can restate the position. You can restate it, the German CEO replied, calm and precise. But can you confirm it? The distinction landed. I felt it even from the hallway, like a pressure change. Vivian's gaze flicked to the empty space where I'd been sitting, then back to the table. Her jaw tightened. I'm authorized to finalize this deal. A chair shifted. Another executive leaned back, arms crossing. Authorization isn't the same as continuity. Was this the moment she realized the room no longer belonged to her? The pen lowered to the table without touching the page. No one reached for theirs. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was procedural. Vivian tried again. Voice firmer. We've spent months aligning on this, and months relying on the same point of contact. Someone else added. Tone neutral. Impossible to argue with. I watched through the narrow glass panel as Vivian's confidence thinned into something sharper, more brittle. She wasn't losing control yet. but she was no longer directing the pace. Inside the room, the deal waited. So did the question she couldn't answer. I didn't step back into the room. I didn't need to. The words reached me anyway, carried through the glass and the thin strip of open space near the door. A legal voice this time. Flat. Careful. The kind that never raises itself unless it has to. There is a clause relevant to the situation. Vivian turned in her chair. I could see it from the hallway, the sharp movement. The sudden attention. Which clause A page slid across the table? Someone cleared their throat, not to speak louder, but to make sure the room stayed quiet. The key person provision. The reading began. No emphasis, no drama, just text. This agreement remains valid only upon confirmation by the designated lead negotiator at the final session. A pause followed. Not hesitation, recognition. Another voice, lower, and the designated individual. The page shifted again. A finger traced a line. Stopped. Callista. My name didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed exactly where it was supposed to. Vivian leaned forward. Her hand reached for the folder. Flipping pages too fast now. Eyes scanning for something she'd missed. The confidence she'd walked in with didn't vanish. It cracked. That was worse. Cracks spread. I can confirm on behalf of the company. She pressed. That's a formality. That's an assumption. Came back immediately. And not one we agreed to. Someone else spoke up. Measured. The clause was non-negotiable. We accepted it because of continuity. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. She looked toward the door again. Toward the space where I wasn't standing. Had she really thought removing me would leave the structure intact? A chair shifted. Another pen was set down. Deliberately. Parallel to the page. Across the table. A legal advisor tapped the margin once, signaling the end of discussion. The confirmation hasn't occurred. He said, which means the agreement hasn't either. I felt the weight of it settle. Not triumph. Not relief. Just certainty. Vivian hadn't fired a problem. She'd pulled the pin. Inside the room, the paper stayed unsigned, and no one reached for the door yet. The first chair moved without drama. It wasn't pushed back hard, just enough to signal intent. The CEO nearest the window stood, jacket already buttoned, eyes never leaving the table. Another followed, then another. The sound of leather shifting, replacing any argument that might have come next. Vivian lifted a hand. We can resolve this. No one sat back down. A voice from the far side cut through. Even and controlled. Resolution requires stability. Another added, quieter but firmer. Stability requires predictability. Phones began to vibrate, not all at once. One, then two, a third. Answered under the table with a glance that tightened into something sharper. A legal advisor leaned in and murmured a single line to his client. The client nodded and closed the folder without touching the pen. Vivian stepped away from the table, trying to intercept momentum with proximity. The fundamentals haven't changed. They have, someone replied, already moving toward the door. Leadership volatility is a material risk. The word risk landed heavy. It always did. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. A market alert flashed across the screen. Numbers moving the wrong direction fast enough to be noticed. The room felt smaller as reality caught up to it. Efficient and indifferent. Was this how quickly confidence turned into caution at this level? Vivian's voice rose. Not loud enough to be a shout, but pitched higher than before. Walking away now creates exposure. A brief pause, then, from near the exit, staying creates more. That was the last exchange that mattered. One by one, they left. No slamming doors, no accusations, just calculated distance. The kind that protects capital and reputations without drawing attention to itself. The table was left with untouched water glasses and unsigned pages aligned too neatly to be accidental. A legal advisor gathered his materials. Expression neutral, already thinking ahead. Vivian remained standing. Hands braced against the table she no longer controlled. I stayed where I was, just outside the room, listening to the absence settle. The deal hadn't exploded, It had simply been withdrawn, quietly, by people who knew exactly when to stop pretending certainty still existed. Behind the glass, Vivian stared at the empty chairs, the weight of them finally registering. In front of me, the hallway filled with footsteps moving in one direction away. What's worse than being yelled at in public, being left alone after everyone has decided you're no longer worth arguing with? I stayed near the doorway as the last of them filed out. No one rushed. No one looked back. Chairs were pushed in with care, like this room might still matter later. Just not right now. Vivian stood at the center of it, hands pressed flat against the table, shoulders stiff. She didn't call after them. She didn't apologize. There was nothing left that would change the direction of their feet. One of the CEOs slowed when he reached me. Older. Precise. He didn't offer words, just his hand. I took it. The grip was firm, brief, deliberate. The kind that says we'll talk without promising anything out loud. When he let go, he turned and followed the others down the corridor, already dialing someone on his phone. Vivian finally looked up. Our eyes met for half a second. Whatever she expected to find, their anger, satisfaction, panic, she didn't. I wasn't guarding anything. I wasn't celebrating. I was waiting. This didn't have to happen, she said. It wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to rewrite the last hour into something manageable. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. It already did. She took a step toward me, then stopped. The room behind her was too quiet now. No movement. No witnesses. Just the weight of what had emptied out. If the deal was gone, why did it feel like my leverage had just begun? I turned before she could say anything else. Not out of restraint, out of timing. There are moments when staying gives the other person too much space to reshape the story. As I walked away, my phone vibrated again. Not a market alert this time. A name. One I recognized from the table. I didn't answer yet. Some conversations are better taken when you're already moving forward. I took one sip and set the glass down. The phone lit up before the taste settled. Then again, and again. Same pattern. Different names. None of them Vivian. I turned the screen face down. It buzzed anyway. Insistent. Like it didn't care whether I was ready or not. A man a few stools down glanced over, then looked away. Everyone in places like this knows when not to ask questions. I answered the third call. We won't be continuing with her company, the voice said. Calm. Already past the drama. That decision is final. I leaned back against the bar. That was fast. It was overdue. Another vibration cut in. I let it go. The caller stayed on the line. Waiting. You're forming something. He continued. Not a question. Independent. Advisory. I'm considering it. Then let's be clear. A pause. We don't want a new firm. We want continuity. I ended the call and immediately answered the next. Different accent. Same message. We're aligned, this one said, but alignment requires a single point of accountability, which you no longer have, I replied, which we'd like to restore. Was this what it looked like when trust detached itself from a logo and followed a person instead? I finally silenced the phone and picked up the glass again. The ice had melted. I didn't mind. My thoughts were moving faster now, stacking options, pressure points, consequences. Another call slipped through before the silence held. I answered without looking. If you're calling to apologize, I began. You're late. A short breath on the other end. I'm calling to ask what your terms would be. That changed the temperature. I didn't answer right away. I didn't have to. The balance had shifted enough that hesitation worked in my favor now. I'll let you know, I said, and ended it. The phone stayed quiet after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone understood the next move wasn't theirs. I stood, slid a bill across the counter, and picked up my bag. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be a reaction. I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started a clean document. Name, structure, scope, authority. By the time the sun hinted at showing up, the firm existed on paper and in my head. Independent, advisory, no titles borrowed, no committees to appease. The first call came before I finished the second paragraph. We need a single point. The voice pressed, clipped and practical. Someone who can commit without looping back to a board. I don't answer to one anymore. A pause, then good. Another line rang in, then another. Each conversation shorter than the last, less convincing, more confirming. The leverage was real now, not theoretical. I drafted one email and stared at it longer than necessary. One sentence. No greeting, no softening. I can salvage this. My fee is 10% of the total value, and I hold veto power over the board. I sent it to Vivian and closed the laptop. What would you ask for if you never had to beg for a seat again? My phone buzzed almost immediately. I let it ring. When it stopped, a message followed 3 words, then a backspace, then nothing. Another call came in, this time from a number I recognized from the table. We've reviewed your terms, he said once I answered. They're firm, they're necessary, and non-negotiable. That's what firm means. A breath on the other end. Then we proceed. I hung up and opened the document again, added dates, added safeguards, removed anything that smelled like compromise for the sake of comfort. Another vibration. Vivian this time. I watched it light up and go dark. Watched it try again. I didn't block her. I didn't need to. Silence was clearer than any refusal. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. The day had finally decided what it was going to be. There was one meeting left to attend. And this time, I was setting the agenda. The room looked the same when I walked in a week later. Same table, same seats, same folders stacked in the center. What changed was where I stopped. I took the chair at the head without asking. No one corrected me. Across the table, faces settled, familiar and unreadable. The kind of attention that waits for direction instead of permission. At the edge of the room, Vivian stood with her hands clasped, saying nothing. She had learned when silence no longer worked in her favor. A folder slid toward me. I opened it, skimmed the final page, then set it back down. Confirm the revisions. A pen tapped once. Confirmed. Another voice followed. Steady. Risk language aligns with the last session. Then proceed. 13 pens moved together. Not rushed, not ceremonial, just coordinated. Like people who had already decided. Paper shifted. Pages turned. The sound was quiet but decisive. The kind that leaves no space for doubt. Vivian took a step forward, then stopped. No one looked up. She stayed where she was, watching the work continue without her. When the last signature was in place, a hand extended toward me with the document. I signed and capped the pen. No applause followed. No speeches. The meeting ended the way it should have ended the first time. I stood and gathered my things. Vivian's eyes met mine for a moment. Whatever she wanted to say stayed unspoken. It wasn't needed anymore. Before I left, I paused long enough to let the room settle. We move forward under these terms. If they change, we pause. If trust breaks, we stop. Heads nodded. Not out of agreement, out of understanding. Here's the lesson I'm taking with me. If you let people cross your boundaries to keep the peace, they will keep crossing them. The moment you protect your position, the right people adjust and the wrong ones remove themselves. Thank you for staying with this story. If it hit close to home, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about boundaries, work, and finding your footing matter to you, stick around and follow along. I'll be here.